Um, for us, it was clear that one of the issues around open data was the fact that even though governments were able to open up databases and to offer data for people for public scrutiny or for creating services or creating infrastructure, there was some sort of mixed match, a general mixed match between the competences, the level of data literacy of general citizens, and I would perhaps include myself there, and what you can actually just produce and obtain through data that is free, publicly available for people. So that was the reason why we put together this research network. The idea was to first explore was the kind of state of current affairs in Scotland in terms of data literacy, and perhaps bring together all different sectors, starting from government, then education sector, third sector, you name it. Different areas in society to come together and discuss these issues. So ultimately, what we would like to is to first offer a space for dialogue, a space for mutual interaction, for discussion, but at the same time to be able just to have real impact in society and in policy making and the ideas and developments of these initiatives. So this is the first of a large number of events that we have planned for a 2 years period. So that is pretty much what we would like to generate from this is to put out there the projects, the initiatives, the ideas, for people just to know about this a little bit more, to get interested. Normally, I was talking to Doug and Alan about this, and my quite personal perspective about this is that before thinking in data literacy in terms of the competences, the kind of really instrumental competences on how to clean, use, share, analyze, process data, to me is always there's always a kind of step before, which is just raising a little bit of awareness about what data is, as Alan was suggesting now. Was data, what data is, and what are the benefits, the good sides of the good side of data and the bad side as well. What happens with the data we generate on a daily basis? What happens with companies that are obviously monetizing data, and what happens with, for instance, social network, really powerful power holders now like Facebook and Google. What are the influences that they have in our everyday lives? So one of the examples I always use is from one of our colleagues from Sterling is this education app called Class Dojo, and it's interesting to see how it's the kind of fastest adopted educational technology. Actually, it's just amazing. It's one of those things that was created in Silicon Valley, and everyone is just adopting because it's free. It generates a really interesting set of exercises and experiences for pupils. And at school, it has this kind of really fancy interface, gamified. You can have as a pupil, you can have Class Dojo points, and that creates some sort of competition between kids, and it's fantastic. But when you ask the obvious question to teachers using this, so what happens with the data you are inputting there? You know that what you're doing is basically just inputting data, behavioral data from kids that should be protected. From being really enthusiastic about this, they go, oh. So I think that step that basically creates a little bit of more critical understanding of what data is. And that is basically something that for Greg and I has been really instrumental. So that's basically what we have to kind of to put on the table. apart from also just getting to know you and to meeting with you and to see what you're doing and to also offer our help and in order to drive, support, creating space for dialogue, to kind of work collaboratively in making this happen. So that's pretty much. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, you pretty much covered it quite a lot, actually. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a few things that we can kind of identify pretty early on, which we have actually in terms of common threads that we believe we're working in terms of direction and basic kind of concepts. So, for example, one of the work packages that Steve mentioned earlier on in the Scottish Cities Alliance initiatives revolves around community and capacity building. I think that's probably certainly a secondary or kind of next phase kind of goal that we want to kind of think about and work with you guys on, because that's making real change. It's making material change for very positive kind of benefit for communities. And also, of course, it's quite important to acknowledge that within academia, as Eddie described, we're not really kind of in a position, in that very privileged position, to kind of work within a closeted kind of cell like a monk and kind of produce all of these great works. That doesn't really happen now, and I don't think that it should either, because it doesn't give any kind of material benefit necessarily to communities. The main kind of drive now in terms of research is, and it should be, in my opinion, community driven and community based. And even when it comes down to things like data, where you can consider data driven governance, data driven insights and expertise, at the centre of that, people have real concerns, communities have real concerns and real issues that need to be addressed, either today, tomorrow, or in 10 years' time, whatever, And I think that's something always to bear in mind. It's something that's kind of the heart of what we're doing. So that's certainly a kind of secondary or tertiary goal that we're kind of working towards, and that's something that starts from here. And one of the things that we'll be doing next, that was decided as part of the kind of agenda building from the first core programme team meeting, was working with Stephen particularly, but also bringing in expertise from educators from various parts of the network to help to inform that basic work of mapping data literacy and kind of addressing some of those gaps that we've identified. So I think that's a really important kind of next step. So that's where we're at. I don't think that we should maybe kind of monopolise the time and maybe kind of get down to some discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the next step, is just to create some sort of working definition of what data literacy is. Because data literacy could be information literacy, statistical literacy, digital literacy, could mean many things to many people. One of the questions that I have, and that is one of the things I always ask, is what is your sense about the level of engagement of people, regular citizens, not to mention hacking hackers, civic hackers, or this type of really people who's conversant with coding and things like that. But I'm just regular citizens. What is the level of engagement, real engagement, that you can see within the councils of people just asking for data, making use of data?
And is there an appetite for that as
yes,
well?
Exactly.
Because we're looking at issues where clearly we've identified a need for a culture change, but are people ready for it? Are they willing to kind of engage with that process or not? My initial sense is probably not quite yet, because it's quite scary. It's quite new, and there are unknown unknowns, right?
I'm not sure if it's always being scary. First, the culture is not there, but apart from that, is how most times, or our preconception of how the data is displayed. You know, because in my mind, when I think about big data, I think about this big Excel spreadsheet, and that is not everyone's cup of tea. So it's how information is spread and how you can actually sift through the information. I think that will be a huge aspect as well of you engaging, let's say, the lay community rather than the geeky community. And so I think that's where when people talk about data literacy, it seems to be this is for this community that will decode this for me, and then you can translate this into something else. So, and I think having researchers there is already quite something, because it's already very different from people that are already engaged with using this type of information in the way it's displayed. So, and in a way, it's almost like all the technology of the 90s that was, you pretty much had to have a computer science a degree to be able to use it to its maximum potential. And I think we're probably still at a kind of an early stage level where it's hard to engage with a less specialized community because of that. So I'm not sure
I think you're looking at people engage with data every day, ordinary people, but they consume it. They're not creating it, they're not modelling it, they're not expecting it. They expect data to be made available to them in a way that they can find it useful. You've got different levels of adoption going on, and as you were saying, with the web, it always starts with your hardcore. It's going to start with people who have the skills, the necessary skills around it, and then it becomes mainstream, and eventually you have a place where you actually don't need the skills because it's become so mainstream. But the point is that people have to want to do that. Now, at the moment, if they don't know about it, they're not going to do it. And what you get are community councils, you get people who have got a particular interest in a particular area who want to get in touch with the council and want to know, and it tends to be much more adversarial. It's much more about why aren't you sharing that data and so on. And that in the UK is still quite basic, although you've got pockets of quite a lot of activity going on, it's quite basic. And it is because it's people that are not viewing data in that way. They do it, and also I would say things like media contribute to that, because they're constantly manipulating data and then presenting it. And unless you're the kind of person that questions that, you just sit there and consume it. And you would have to have a sort of questing mind to want to do that in the first place and be interested. I'm constantly surprised when I talk to people about it. They don't know about the data source, they don't know about the quality. It's giving me what I need, maybe the time of my bus, and that's all I care about, So I think one of the assumptions is people want to do it when maybe they don't. What do you think?
So I was thinking about that, and if you were to say that people had more data literacy and were able to understand what was happening behind it, they might stop using the application, right? So, but there's still obviously a demand there for what the application gave them. So it could mean that they stop using the app, and the application provider pivots their business model, for example, and means that people have to pay for it instead of giving their data away for free, which might mean that less people use it, so less people get a benefit. So, and it comes all back round to do people have an appetite to be data literate, or they've got an appetite to consume a service based on data. And would it be progress that people then stop using that app and the benefit was therefore no longer delivered? And I'm not saying one way or the other here, I'm just kind of posing the question. Would that be progress, basically? But I totally agree with your point, Sally. People have to want to become more data literate, and I don't think there's the biggest demand for that. And it should come right from the school learning, really.
Can I pick up on that one then? Because I don't know if you're aware, but Dundee's got quite a big gaming community. We've got 30 plus games developers. And we actually have a middleware company called Yo-Yo Games in the city. And what they do is they have a platform that essentially allows you to program and publish games. So a few years ago we worked with them to try and get them to deliver a free copy of their middleware into all schools, both primary and secondary, which has been quite successful. And I run a couple of programs where we take S5, which is secondary before they go there and you go to university. We take S5 and give them a week away to learn how to do games development. We also set up a similar project for S3, but where it's been most successful in regards to pickup is in primary schools, where we've got over 95% of our schools with code clubs set up now, which teaches young kids through Code Club UK, local partners, Bright Solid, which is a data company that's based in the city. They have servers and such like that. And they'll teach them Scratch, HTML and Python, and funnel, quite a bit of funnel along the way and all the rest of it. But what the feedback from the schools is that when they go from the kind of the core ages of 9 to 11, when they stop doing that and go on to secondary school and start to go to the next level, that's when there's actually a gap, because the teachers or the next level of school doesn't actually have the data literacy to push on and let that be the next stage. So I don't know how this helps the conversation, but it's certainly an interesting way to look at data literacy, that we maybe are starting to get picked up at the early age, but can we continue to progress literacy through our schools at a later stage if the skill sets maybe aren't quite there yet?
So I'm going to completely disagree and agree, as I have a camera in my face. So Sally, I think you made some really good points. Where I'm challenged is who owns the burden here. I have trouble with the idea of sort of giving the peoples the burden for data literacy. And let's talk through a couple examples. So that actually was perfect. So I have 3 small children, which is why I cough all the time, 5, 7, and 9 years old. And I feel that STEM should be an active part of their life. We live in a very small community. It's counterintuitive to me as to why they didn't start programming at age 4 or 5. But so I've struggled for the past couple of years trying to figure out, how do I introduce the older to the logic of math and programming? Not in like a weird way, but it's just part of curriculum. And I had been trying to teach my son the Sketch programming language from MIT, and he just didn't get it. So last month, I have a love of the Python language. I found a service called Code Combat. It's a Silicon Valley early stage startup funded by Andreessen, and he's able to program little warriors to essentially chop each other up. And for my 9-year-old, the world is now good. Because we're able to take something that is not necessarily intuitive and put it into his language. And he didn't have to carry the water to that. Interesting example 1. Example 2. So earlier, I may or may not have talked about city GPS data. So snowplows have enormous amounts we have 350, 360 snowplows in Chicago. Every 30 seconds, they send off a GPS ping, and you end up with millions and millions of rows of data. This is useful data to people. It's useful data to researchers. But how do you get people engaged in, it's not technically big data, but bigger data? So we built something called Plow Tracker, where it's a super simple website, and it tells you where your plow is. And you can sit there, and in Chicago, where we get real snow, you can watch your plow come down the street. And you'll be like, oh, it's coming. It's on my iPad. It's coming. And it was a case of saying, you can take big, near real-time data and bring it to people in a way they're going to understand in a UI-friendly way. So what's the point of the 2 examples? I think There's always going to be a cohort who needs to carry some of the technical water here. We should be wary about trying to bring people to us and instead try to bring us to them. And it comes back to lessons in software development. Like, I can program what I think is the most brilliant thing. If it doesn't have a usable UI, no one cares. So we need to think about UI, UX, and how we interact with our users.
I think in a roundabout way I was actually saying that. And my background is web and UX, and I completely agree with you. I really just do not think everybody needs to be a programmer. I don't think everybody needs to do data science. I think they have to have an understanding, because as we move forward, everything's going to require some level of knowledge. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to achieve it. As I was talking to you earlier, a colleague of mine at work is at the moment investigating how to provide skill bases for people who are perhaps looking for a career change, who have transferable skills. And as I was hearing at DataFest last week, we're now looking at interdisciplinary teams, skills they might have such as policymaker, project manager, are going to be just as relevant as I'm a data scientist. But and that's something that was coming through loud and clear at that festival. But that again is moving quite quickly, in the sense that the local authorities are still going, we can't afford a data scientist, whereas actually it's already moving. And as people develop and realise they need something more modelled, if you like. But speaking as a consumer, I'm very happy somebody could create an app with a good UI that I can then consume. I'm not a developer. I don't want to be a developer, but I do want to be able to use data that's useful.
Well, I think the moral of the story is eventually we need to get to discussions of making data easier to use. You should, today you need to write code. Okay, you just do, and you also need to understand math, because as I talked about earlier, it is easy to mess it up. But we need to, as a thought cohort, aim to make it easier. We should not try and keep it within our niche, but make it easier to produce results, produce outcomes, make programming easier, because systems are only going to get more complicated. If there are not support mechanisms within, it will only get harder.
Just going back, you asked who was interested in data, not being able to contribute much from an open data point of view, but from a freedom of information point of view, over the last couple of years we have been looking at what type of requests we're getting in from whom, and we're running fairly consistently about 15% of requests that come in every year actually related to something specific in Stirling. So from a Stirling citizen or relating to a specific decision in Stirling or a specific location, 85% are round robins that have got to every local authority, perhaps in the UK, not just Scotland, looking to somebody, obviously, to aggregate our data with somebody else. So it was really surprising to me, thinking that FOI was meant to be about the citizen accessing the data. They're not. I think that most of our citizens are accessing data via somebody else. So, the national media is collecting that data, writing a story, and then the local citizens are reading that. They're not asking us direct, they're not coming to us direct. And it was just really quite interesting. And I think, obviously, with open data as well, the vast majority of people will still get the data they want via, an intermediary, whether that's the media or whether it's an app or whether it's whatever it is. I don't necessarily see from that FOI experience that a lot of our data sets will be downloaded by Stirling citizens. It'll be somebody else who's using it on their behalf, I think.
I remember one day I was at the airport, and I think it was Edinburgh Airport. And when the luggage is separated in a different bale, and there was a man just behind me. He was like he's in his 60s, and he was saying, you know what? I always have wondered what are the parameters they use in order to separate and to split the things. And I once actually just submitted an FOI request to asking about this. And I said, "Oh, are you a journalist?" He says, "No, I'm just a concerned citizen." To me was my response was, "Oh, so you know about FOI, therefore you should be either a journalist or or someone related with the council, or to me, it never crossed my mind the fact that he might be just a citizen concerned, and he knows the data available and how to access it and how to make use and what are the rights. So to me, that's why I think from this session, the one of the important highlights from both of Brett's and Tanji's conversations were outreach. How do we really connect with people? How do we go and we do meetups or social media and try to just so from your perspective, what are the kind of the initiatives that are you kind of in terms of outreach? Because you talk about the projects, but how do you make them happen? Because that's something that we're concerned about, certain aspects of this project. So your input would be really valued.
Well, my projects have always started from a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So they're problem led. A lot of it's about defining the problem, and for that you're building a community to do that with different stakeholders. And then if you are delivering something, as I've done, you generally are doing that with the community because you're carrying out user testing, you're doing co-production, because otherwise it's not going to be meaningful for them. And my experience is that although it's not big learning, it is learning, and people learn from it and look at things in a different way. I think what I mentioned very briefly at the end there about wanting to work with localities is different. What I'm proposing is that we do make our data more accessible in the sense of we do what other local authorities do, which is we publish reports with structured data and with visualizations in them. But they're our choice, they're our interpretation. And there's nothing wrong with that, it's what councils do. But what you want to do is to be sharing back raw data or looking at storytelling in a different way that's more accessible for people so that they understand the impact of something that's happening. And ideally, you actually involve them before that. You're actually taking them through the process with you, and they're looking at the data with you, and that would be true co-production. And that's what I'm kind of pitching at the moment in the council as something we explore. And getting a positive response. People think it's a good thing to be looking at. I don't think it'll be easy because I think communities, again historically, everybody feel free to disagree with me, but councils tend to get viewed as, council's bad, what the council does is bad, and we are picking them up on it, whereas this would be a much more equal relationship.
It's interesting. It sounds a lot more like a much more deliberative model rather than kind of top down or or the coercion kind of first step in the ladder. In terms of getting people to buy in, it's kind of like, right, okay, well, we start out with the problem. How do we solve this? But you tell us as much as we tell you, and then you start from there. I think also it feeds into the notion that we quite easily, when we're looking at this critically, we quite easily kind of conflate the idea of consumption with really elegant UI or UX design, and actually that's not the case. Sometimes people do need things presented to them in ways that kind of are really easy to buy into. Not necessarily for consumption purposes, but just to kind of get a basic understanding. Okay, I know where I'm at now. I can proceed with what I need to do, and that's just as proactive in some ways as being able to understand code in some ways. I just wanted to kind of come back to something that Alan you mentioned in terms of the continuity of experience of school kids and how that might feed into the process, because I think that's really important. We're kind of missing a trick there maybe, and it's not. I think this is more Christina's field than mine, but my understanding was that a couple of years ago, Education Scotland in particular, but also there was some SQA involvement, ran a consultation and quite a large-scale study on transitions between primary and secondary education. And I'm kind of wondering whether they missed a trick there in terms of STEM subjects, in terms of coding, in terms of a little bit more joined-up thinking in terms of data literacy. I don't know if you've heard anything about that and whether that kind of fits in there, but certainly it seems that there's something missing.
Yeah, We've got a couple of education officers that kind of deal with STEM, and I'm from business development, and I kind of just go on what I get told from them in various bits. But I know that just in general in Dundee we seem to be struggling for secondary school teachers, just because it seems to be in the papers quite a lot at the moment. So I need to investigate that further to find out what the actual results would be in the real problem. So that's maybe something that, if you wanted to pick up later on, I could introduce you to the STEM person.
I think that will stand Dundee in good stead though in the future, if all the primary school kids are at least getting exposed to all this coding and all that kind of.
We've got around about 30 software development companies that have sprung up, game based, and I think a lot of that's because we had the University of Aberdeen with the first ever degree in computer games education, so there's always been programmers being getting started for around about sort of 15 years or so, and there was a programme that was put in from the UK government called the Prototype Fund, which allows, I think it was around about sort of 25 to 30 K seed funding for companies that want to start up with essentially a prototype. So a lot of companies that are on the go at the moment that are still sustainable started up from basically that prototype fund from being coders that have come out of the university. So if you fast forward that 5-10 years from now, hopefully there's a lot of people that are coming through the education system that no longer are just getting taught Word and Excel, which is probably something that happened a while back, that's what you were getting taught at school. When I was at school, it was a BBC Acorn, and you learned how to program on your ZX Spectrum, and of course Timex, which created the Spectrum, had a factory in Dundee, so I wonder if that's where the legacy comes from, the fact that they were running a lot in the back of the lorry.
Is it difficult to navigate politics within the council to put forward your ideas, to kind of convince people around? For instance, what Sally was saying that she's pitching ideas and she's getting support. I don't know what's your sense, and what are your thoughts about this as an issue from prospering on this some sort of field? Or do you feel that things are kind of smooth?
Relatively risk-averse organisations. So the idea, you come in, you say, you talk to people who do statistics or analytics within council, and say, well, actually, you need to be looking at data science, or you need to be publishing data. Any of these subjects. Traditionally, you wouldn't have gotten a massive amount of engagement, I think, in the past. But I have found, I've actually found a surprising number of teams have been receptive once you really explain the benefits. And you kind of try to kind of cut down on the jargon if you can. And I've found there's been quite good engagement. But I guess in the longer term, it's overall culture change. It's moving towards publishing data by default. Kind of getting around, kind of breaking down these internal silos that exist within the organisation, where one team could be sitting next to another team and they have no idea what kind of data they're putting out, and often even within teams I've found as well. I'll speak to team leaders that perhaps don't have the kind of, they'll have a good general sense of what they're producing, but it's once you speak to people within teams that you get a really good sense of what they actually produce and what they use and what they don't use it for.
How do you see the open data landscape in Scotland in the next 5 years?
Good one. Yeah, I mean, I hope that there'll be more data, and I hope there'll be more real-time data, because, and you touched on this, I think, Sally, the bringing in the systemization of open data publication should be happening more and more, so that it becomes like not just business as usual, but it's part of the system, so it is just going to happen effectively. I do worry a little bit though, because if you look at like the Helsinki examples, and I'm really sorry I missed the Brett's talk earlier on, but I'll hopefully catch up on it. But the Helsinki example talked about 8 years ago, the mayor said this is a great idea. Whereas the last 4 years of working with open data, I found difficult, like a challenge, like almost like a fight at times. And sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not. But I don't know why the Helsinki example would be too different to the Glasgow or Edinburgh example, but it seems to be. And I'm not really sure why, if it's cultural differences between countries. But the fact, I think we're coming from a different angle for some reason. And so I think there's more people on board with open data in Scottish cities at least.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that the policymakers will probably look at is what's your actual benefit at the end of the day. Is it something that's just going to fall off the edge of a cliff, or is it something that we're going to continue with? But just the movement of traffic towards further advancement of machine to machine, I think that's only going to benefit decision makers to allow them to be more efficient, or pushing towards an enhanced kind of human to machine interaction. I think that's the way things are going.
Yeah, it just feels in this country like people need to be proven of the business case before they go forward and take a leap in the open data, whereas other countries not necessarily.
I think this is quite an interesting thing, because I think it does feed into what Brett was talking about.
Well, I was about to argue
clearly
the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking in terms of, because I've got a little kind of note here from your talk, Brett, and it says trust. Checking before validating and releasing data builds distrust, whereas automation can build trust. But there does seem to be a kind of very opposite view to that, where automation is viewed as quite a risky kind of enterprise.
Yeah.
But you're quite a champion of automation, right?
So I go back to my crime story. So if I hadn't played the crime card, you probably wouldn't have invited me to come here. And that's it. Like, I took a risk and we went from 0 to the leader. And I could have been fired the next day. Like, the chief of police could have won, or something terrible could have come out. And that gets back to issues of risk tolerance. However, for your naysayers, automation builds trust. Because the minute you say that a politician or someone is checking the data in the middle, it makes people nervous. It's irrational. If you are going to move real data into a portal, you can't check it. It's just too big. And if you don't have enough data that's an issue, you probably shouldn't be in this business at all, and you need to actually join the millennia. Now, with that being said, sort of cornerstones here, and where I would poke folks a bit, are sustainability automation to get at transparency and trust. But two, if you're ever going to get value from a system like this, you need to build things that will end up being sticky and will end up being addictive. The rest of it people just don't care about. And so you need to sit and think about, what is a case which my residents are going to use like you can't believe, or what's going to save money, because that matters. And when we had dinner last night, I talked about financial data. It's boring, but you can save real money in relatively straightforward analytics. Or how do you make things more efficient? How do you prevent crime? Like, go back to this idea of pick your win. And and if you don't necessarily need a fully baked economic plan, you need something that's so important, sticky, politically great, press-worthy, resident happy, that's how you get momentum. And I would strongly encourage not reckless, but thoughtful, risk-tolerant, bold moves, or execution will take so long that it will be more talk than action.
That's interesting when you say that automation generates trust, because to me, and I think that has to do with something you explained before, which was algorithmic accountability or something like that. Automation will have inherited biases, and then in order to avoid that, you need to kind of publish either the code of all the algorithms that this system has, and then you need to kind of have people who understand this in order to make it transparent. So it's kind of it's a circle.
I'm not sure I agree with that as far as open data goes. So open data and so I guess we'll take this a little more technical. You have a transactional system, you have an ETL which then feeds into some sort of repository. As long as you're honest about the transformation side of it, there's little that's there. Algorithms can invoke bias. Extraction into warehouse platform, much less so. You're essentially saying, if we look at public safety examples, I have an RMS system, a record system, pull out the data, anonymize it, this is how I do it, and out it goes. It's just where people get nervous is when you say, I'm going to review the records, and then we'll post them at these intervals.
Yeah.
It could be completely clean. People just look at that and they say,
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. The other thing is, one of the first attempts that I did at using data was using the Google tool that enables you to kind of fuse to different databases from
like Google Correlate.
Exactly. So is that your idea in terms of making data usable, to make it, because to me that is, I couldn't.
So like problems I like are on, if I were hanging out in Scotland for a while, focusing on the 7 cities, I would say what is a common problem? And I would probably come to one of a few. I'd say property crime. It's a great problem. Everyone it's not a good problem, but everyone has it. There are common denominators. Financial data, things like that. And I'd say, let's build one analytic and make it work in each place. It's highly portable. Just give each of the 7 cities a win. It's going to be a small block of code, similar data, push out the door. Like property crime, like you take something, we talked about this last night, the Knox principle. Well proven simple math with the existing code. It will work. Like if we were done early today and we had a data set, we could solve the problem in 2 hours. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
2 hours. And some bubbly water.
Alan, you were also mentioning before there's some sort of data champions program that you're kind of. Could you expand a little bit on this?
Well, Stephen mentioned in the work packages. Work package 4 is essentially putting it down to capacity building. So we're looking at ways of stakeholder engagement, both internal and external. So in our internal and I guess external engagement, we're going to be looking to try and get data champions that will be able to kind of spread the message about how it is, and it's more important to get that in for the data owners within the city council, so they're aware. They might already be publishing something, but they might just be publishing it as a PDF. So it's just saying, like, rather than putting it in this format, could you start to put more CSV or linked data files up? So I think that was kind of where I was getting at, and there's a number of programmes that the Scottish Government had been running, and there's also a number of programmes that are forthcoming where people can kind of go on and learn a little bit more about publishing open data, licensing and various things that that helps build capacity within, I guess, within organisations. So we're essentially trying to promote that in Dundee City Council. We've not started the programme yet, but we're actually bringing someone in post specifically to capacity build for the project.
So I wanted to ask you another question. And the next session, as I said, that we have and is going to predominantly involve people from the education sector. And one of the things that we want to try to get a consensus about what data literacy is or means. What are your views in terms of data literacy? What do you think should be data literacy? What would you like to teach people in order to make them data literate?
I would like to teach them how to understand what they're looking at. And I mean that at a very basic level. So if they're reading an article in The Guardian, to actually interpret it rather than just consume what's written. Again, at the Data Fest was a really good guy called Andy Kirk talking about data visualization, and it was so basic what he was saying, but it was really obvious. You know, it was basically highlight the important thing, say what the thing is that's important. You know, very basic, but actually lots of people don't do that. And once you start doing that, you can't stop, because you basically then question it. Yeah. And it's changing people into sort of doing that, questioning it, wants to know more about the data, having a more proactive interest. And then they could apply that to their own areas of life, to their community, to, you know, it's the beginning of learning. So it's actually about data awareness. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I think is the beginning of data literacy.
In Stirling, their organisation development are doing a learning needs analysis of the whole workforce strategy and stuff like that, but something that they're really pushing at team leaders and managers upwards is the idea of the 21st century public servant and the work that University of Birmingham have done about, you know, public sector employees having to be municipal entrepreneurs, about bringing together various skills. And there's something in there about making use of the digital data in order to, you know, make better services, or to tie things together, or to link up things, or to be able to connect things. You know, there's a whole series of sort of, you know, generic skills as well as the professional ones that we used to look for in people in local government, but some really generic skills as well. So that's kind of what I suppose we're basing a lot of the learning needs on, I suppose, for the future.
I mean, that's something I would pick up on, and it's something that, and I'm not saying it specifically about Edinburgh, I think it is a gap. Because I think that, I'm being careful about this, but I think council officers have been used to looking at data in a particular way as well. They may be looking at it, they've created data and it's for a single use. Mm-hmm. They're not looking at the potential of the data, they're not looking at the other value that could be derived, because it's not how they think.
I think it's worse than that. I was interested when, you know, Brett said it was, you know, it's an exhaust, it's kind of a waste product that gets produced as people charged through doing their job. And I've spent 20 years of my life in local government clearing up other people's information, you know, and that's how it feels. And I do think it's getting to the point where people cannot just see the value of the information, but they're willing to act on it and change what they do. I mean, story from a few years ago in a project I was involved in, where the organisation was wanting to look at information about vulnerable children, so children who were becoming known to social work, and actually could we not start identifying the children that were going to get to that point earlier, so that actually we didn't spend so much money and the interventions there, but we could intervene even earlier. But I mean, you know, talk about problematic data sets in terms of personal data and linking it up and all sorts of things. There's all that issue. But from a data protection point of view, you try and make a business case as to what your business purpose is and justify doing it. But it's kind of undermined at the end if you find out that actually the service doesn't have the resources to start looking at children earlier, because they're throwing everything they can into the statutory requirements for once children are vulnerable. So, you know, that whole possible use of data is undermined if actually the organisation hasn't changed the way it works to make use of that data. And, you know, problematic from a data protection point of view if you don't actually have a business purpose for it. So.
What about you? What are your thoughts? I can definitely echo what
what's already been said around the room, in that there is a sense that data is sort of collected or generated and used for one purpose, and often you'll find out tons of work's done and it winds up being one line in an annual performance report that's winds up with something's either green or red or whatever, and there is a sense that things are data is collected just for that purpose. So definitely unlocking that. And that's what I found with the internal silos. It's data's collected and it never really leaves that silo, or it leaves that silo for a very particular purpose. And even from an kind of internal point of view, if your organization has a kind of good sense of what data is being produced throughout, that's where even internally there could be a kind of moment where people where teams realize, well, hang on, these guys produce this. That could be a good example of that, perhaps, and just think off the top of my head, but let's say our events team maybe looks at car parking data generated from an event they ran last year, and maybe looked at which car parks filled up, which ones didn't, and that maybe could affect what roads they look to close, how they look to route kind of traffic or pedestrians. That's completely off the top of my head, but that's one example, perhaps, of better internal data use.
Yeah, I mean, I've just echo what's being said, and like Sally said, there's probably as there is an increased awareness of data literacy or statistical literacy, it's being able to match up these data sets, or at least look at them for their secondary use, which probably has never been done before. And as silos start to join, there is potential for that secondary use of data. And I think that's hopefully what some of the projects we're going to be pushing through will start to uncover.
Yeah. What do you think, Brett? I know that you are a maths proposed, but what do you think are the kind of skills that, because we're not going to have you in the next session, so we'd like just to pick your brain a little bit.
I'm here to help. So when you say that, do you mean back to like my discussion of skills earlier with sort of the Venn diagram, or I'm trying to give
you... What do you think, if we're going to start thinking about data literacy more often at different sectors in society, even academia, what is it that is data literacy then? Is it...
Well, I think there's data literacy today, which is much more hands-on. It's probably a bigger lift, like understanding the different types of data. And we talked about structured, unstructured, aggregate, all of these different things. Understanding the weaknesses in data. And it's part of it is what you probably teach in a classical statistics class. Like, what is a safe level of missing data and challenges? And if you look at a data set or an analytic, what should you be worried about? And how can you bias data? Or how can you, my example from this morning was the bad regression. Like, a bad regression can ruin your life. So I think we need to now teach people much more about what can go wrong and how to be thoughtful about it, and then draw a bit of a line and say, do we then want to teach them the skills to manage this? And that becomes far more technical. Like, what is the difference between thinking about machine learning and classic stats and things there? But there's probably some tiers here, and probably on the most basic tier would be, what should I know? How should I be a skeptic? And how do I avoid doing something stupid? And maybe if you stay with those three, that's a pretty good baseline.
Yeah, great.
That kind of has soundbite written all over it.
The key is to do it in threes.
Yeah.
And then you have a good soundbite.
Yeah.
I don't know, guys, if you want to discuss anything else, ask questions, or...
I think it may be worth kind of thinking, right, okay, in terms of these questions that we've set out, is there anything that you can think of that we've clearly missed, or that we've nearly missed, or something that we haven't quite picked up on yet that needs to be followed up on as a result of some of the discussions from today.
So if I were you, and since I have my last little moment here, I would push yourself hard. I would say, what can we do in the next 90 days that would have big impact? And you guys have heard me say this quite a bit about making that win, stickiness, addiction, all of those different things. I would set the bar much higher than you think you can set it, and pick a way of saying, how can I have a big story? Or how can I have a big win? Or how can I be a game changer? I would get out of your comfort zone, and I would pick something that would work in at least a number of the 7 cities and be highly impactful, and just do it. And that's like, technically you can solve everything. The rest of it is politics, risk, and connectivity. But that would be, I would love to see on the Twitters the big Scottish win.
Before we close the session, Rick, and I could ask you, what would be perhaps your, apart from what you have already said, your advice in terms of what you have seen in Scotland being developed?
Well, so part of it will be repetitive. I think you're being very thoughtful. You may be being too thoughtful. I think we talked about quick wins. I would think looking at Helsinki, looking at Chicago, there is code up there that you can just take and use and do something. But I do think you have the bones of some interesting things. Like, I was looking at Edinburgh. Am I pronouncing it right? Edinburgh. Everyone's pronouncing this differently. The site you showed, the Commons, Right. Like, I think that is a wonderful idea. That is really smart. You have the bones of something really, really good out there that I haven't seen. It solves a real problem, and you can make it much bigger. I think things like that are really interesting. Celebrate success, get it out to the people. So, yeah, and I would also be spending more time thinking about what are common problems. You know, I talked to you guys about what I think are common problems. But what do I know? I've been in Scotland 24 hours. You know, but that would be how I'd focus. You know?
We are doing some of that within looking at the common problems. I think the police example is a great one. We don't have the police in the city government, so there's always practicalities like that, but I think it's really good, really interesting as well, that 98-day thing.
See, I would, and in your mind you might say I am belaboring this. I would go and I would do a 30-minute lit search of the property crime issue and the Knox principle, which is also called the near repeat phenomena. I would then meet with one of my 7 chiefs of police, if that's how it works.
I have one.
Okay, great. So then super easy. You can meet with her or him and say, in these jurisdictions, they have reduced crime by doing this. And this is well proven. And say, let's do it. Next 90 days. There is very, very little downside to reduction strategies with property crime. I've never seen controversy with that.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for not just coming all the way, getting in some cases far away to Stirling, but also just spending the whole day with us with the same enthusiasm from beginning to end. Thanks, Brett, for coming to Scotland and just to give us your wisdom. I don't know if there's anything else you would like to say.
I'm just going to kind of go with the 3 things that I was thinking about, actually, that kind of summarise, or seem to summarise what was said today. One is culture change. I think that's kind of like a real challenge and a theme, and it's not going away. The other one is open by default, which is a principle that I think we can all agree is it's both a good idea and it is something that needs to be looked at from various positions and various roads of development, technically, politically, and community-wise, and also a notion of capacity build that's sustainable. So kind of having skills that are future-proof, skills that are transferable, skills that can be used in different sectors, that are kind of visible in different sectors. I think those are the three things that I've taken from this, and I think that's really useful. I've learned a lot actually in terms of thinking about how those seem to be common elements that need to be tackled. So we're going to take that forward, I think. I'm going to think about that and take it forward. And I am going to be thoughtful. I'm sorry, Brett, that's just the way it works in the humanities. But I'm going to think about that, take it away, think about it, and then maybe kind of apply it in a 90-day challenge.
So one point, and this is to be specific, but it's useful, this open by default piece works really well. The strategy is you have lots of jurisdictions investing in transactional systems into data warehouses right now. What you do is you get in the middle of that process and you say, if you're already making a capital investment to extract into data warehouse BI, you have another code block which says this is how the same ETL, if allowable, and I know it's detailed, will also route into an open data platform. You have a huge efficiency there because you create a reusable code block and it's already a fixed effort. We rolled that out as a policy. It's something that I've talked to countless cities about, and if once they get the DBA and the data warehouse folks on board, it costs too much and it's additional effort just goes away. Very useful.
Thank you very much again, and this concludes the session.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.